In the dust-swept town of Redemption Creek, a mild-mannered 65-year-old sheriff with trembling hands is about to face the most dangerous confrontation of his mysterious career. When the notorious Crimson Riders outlaw gang rolls into town, they think they've found easy pickings in this aging, soft-spoken lawman. What they don't know is that Marshal Thomas Blackwell isn't just any small-town sheriff. He's the legendary Ghost Hand, the most feared gunslinger ever to roam the territories, with 67 confirmed kills to his name before he disappeared a decade ago. The Crimson Riders have been terrorizing towns across the frontier, leaving behind a trail of broken lives and emptied bank vaults. But when they target Redemption Creek, they make the deadly mistake of awakening a ghost that many thought had died long ago. Marshal Thomas Blackwell stood on the worn wooden steps of Redemption Creek's jailhouse, watching the early morning sun cast long shadows down the town's single dusty street. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his simple tin star, a condition that had plagued him for years now, though it had done little to diminish his accuracy with a firearm when it truly mattered. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 65 harsh years had etched deep lines into his face and whitened his once dark hair, but his pale blue eyes remained clear and watchful, missing nothing as they surveyed the quiet town he'd sworn to protect. 10 years had passed since he'd settled in Redemption Creek, taking up the marshal's badge in this remote corner of the Arizona territory. 10 years of peace, of quiet mornings like this one, where the only sounds were shopkeepers opening their doors and the distant call of desert birds. 10 years since he'd last drawn his gun with lethal intent. 10 years of running from a blood-soaked, a past that seemed determined to find him again. The sound of boots on creaking wood made him turn slightly. Clara Sullivan approached, carrying his morning coffee as she did every day. Steam rose from the cup as she set it on the railing beside him. The smell of chicory filled the air between them. "You're looking troubled this morning, Thomas," she said, studying his face. 5 years of bringing him coffee had taught her to read the subtle shifts in his normally guarded expression. Blackwell nodded toward the distant horizon, where a thin line of dust rose against the endless blue sky. "Something's coming, Clara. I can feel it in these old bones." Clara followed his gaze, squinting against the harsh light. "Your bones been wrong before?" "Not about this kind of trouble." The coffee remained untouched as Blackwell continued his vigilant watch. 3 riders had passed through town before sunrise, rough-looking men with cold eyes and worn leather dusters, their horses bearing the marks of hard travel. They'd asked pointed questions at the livery stable about the town, its defenses, the marshal. They'd shown particular interest in the Creek Bend Bank at the end of the street, with its recent shipment of mining payroll. Deputy William Holt approached, on horseback, dust coating his young face. He dismounted with the fluid grace of youth, adjusting his badge with a self-conscious gesture. The boy had served as Blackwell's only deputy for 2 years now, eager and earnest, with more courage than experience. "Mornin', Marshal," Will said, the title coming naturally despite their friendship. "Found something you should see." Blackwell descended the steps, his movements deliberate but surprisingly agile for a man his age. "Those riders." Will's eyebrows rose in surprise. "How did you—" He shook his head. "Never mind. Yeah, tracked them to Eagle Canyon. They weren't alone." The young deputy spread several sketches across the hood of his horse. They showed rough drawings of campfires, hobbled horses, and something more telling. A distinctive bandana, in pattern worn by one of the men. "Crimson Riders," Blackwell said quietly, studying the sketches. His fingers traced the red bandana pattern that gave the notorious gang its name. "They're advanced scouts, checking the lay of the land." "That's what I figured." Will nodded gravely. They've hit 3 towns in the past month. Banks robbed, businesses burned, good people killed. Local lawmen couldn't stop them. Blackwell traced the outlines in the sketches, his mind calculating. Distances, numbers, tactics, because they're just the visible part. There's always something bigger behind groups like this, a planner, someone with a mind for strategy. Clara had followed them, concern evident in her expression. You think they're coming here? To Redemption Creek? They're already here, Blackwell replied, folding the sketches carefully. Question is why? The sound of approaching horses cut through the morning quiet. 3 riders appeared at the edge of town, their mounts kicking up dust as they made their way down the main street. They moved with casual confidence, taking in every detail of Redemption Creek as they passed. The leader, a man with a thick black beard and a scar running from his right eye to the corner of his mouth, nodded slightly at Blackwell as they rode by. That's Jacob Thorne, Will said. Under his breath, recognition dawning on his face. Their scout and tracker, wanted in 4 territories. Blackwell watched the riders disappear around the bend, noting the way they carried themselves, the positions of their weapons, the calculated laziness in their posture that failed to mask their readiness for violence. He's good at his job, Blackwell observed quietly. Noticed my tremor, your inexperience, the bank's single guard. He's mapping the town, looking for weaknesses. Should we stop them? Will asked, his hand drifting toward his pistol. Not yet, Blackwell cautioned. Let them think they're in control for now. Dr. Samuel Freeman emerged from his clinic across the street, medical bag in hand. He'd been Blackwell's friend for the entire decade. The marshal had lived in Redemption Creek, patching him up after the few scuffles that had required his intervention over the years. Trouble? The doctor asked, joining their small gathering. Could it be? Blackwell replied, his voice giving away nothing. Might want to stock extra bandages, Sam? The doctor nodded grimly. He'd seen that look in the marshal's eyes before, on the rare occasions when real violence threatened their small community. Throughout the morning, more signs of the coming storm appeared. Howard Maxwell reported suspicious men examining the bank's exterior with unusual interest. Benjamin Fletcher at the general store caught someone testing the lock on his back storeroom, where he kept ammunition and supplies. Even Abigail Hayes at the schoolhouse noticed rough-looking strangers taking unusual interest in the town's layout, asking questions about the marshal that made her uncomfortable. Blackwell spent the day watching, gathering information. He noted faces, riding styles, weapons of choice. The Crimson Riders were professional, methodical. This wasn't just another town to terrorize. They were planning something bigger, more deliberate. The quiet precision of their reconnaissance reminded him of military operations he'd witnessed during his younger days, riding with the cavalry. By sunset, Blackwell sat in Clara's small restaurant, a cup of coffee growing cold before him. The day's observations turned in his mind like the gears of a complex mechanism, each piece fitting together to form a picture he didn't care for. Will entered, slid into the booth across from him, his young face serious in the fading light. Just got word from Fort Wilcox. The army knows about the Crimson Riders. They think the gang's connected to something bigger. Marcus Drake, Blackwell said quietly, the name falling between them like a physical weight. Will stared, clearly shocked. How did you... The pattern, the precision, and those advanced scouts. Blackwell's voice carried the weight of old knowledge. Drake commands his men like a military unit, not a common gang. Those aren't ordinary bandits out there. Drake, Will's voice dropped to a whisper, the same Drake who led that Confederate guerrilla unit after the war, the one they call the Scarlet Colonel. The same man, Blackwell confirmed, his eyes growing. Distant with memory. Different cause, same tactics. Clara appeared with fresh coffee, concern evident in her movements. You've gone quiet, Thomas. That's never a good sign. Drake is methodical, Blackwell explained, accepting the fresh cup though he made no move to drink. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. He doesn't just pick towns at random. There's a reason he's chosen Redemption Creek. The bank, Will suggested. That mining payroll's the biggest we've ever held. Blackwell shook his head slightly. Drake's hit bigger scores in bigger towns. No, he's here for something else. As if to punctuate his words, the distant sound of horses approached. More this. Time, at least a dozen riders moving in formation. Their hoofbeats echoed through the town like a measured drumbeat, deliberate and ominous. Will tensed, his hand moving toward his gun. They're coming now. No, Blackwell replied, watching through the window as the riders appeared. Just showing themselves, making sure we know they're here. The Crimson Riders moved slowly down the main street, their mounts' steel shoes striking. Sparks from the occasional stone. Each man wore a distinctive red bandana, either at the neck or tied around their hat, marking them as members of Drake's notorious gang. At their head rode a figure whose very presence seemed to darken the air around him. Tall and lean, with silver at his temples and cold grey eyes that surveyed Redemption Creek like a hawk studying prey. Marcus Drake himself, Blackwell murmured, recognition flashing in his eyes. He usually sends his lieutenants to lead operations. They're not even trying to hide anymore, Will observed, his voice tight with tension. They don't need to, Blackwell replied, watching the procession with the calculated detachment of a man who had seen such displays before. By their count, they're facing an old marshal with shaking hands, an inexperienced deputy, and a town with no defenses. They think they've already won. Have they? Will asked, his youthful confidence wavering for the first time since Blackwell had known him. Blackwell's trembling hand moved to his hip, where no gun currently rested. An unconscious gesture born of decades of lethal encounters. They forgot the first rule of hunting, Will. The most dangerous predator is the one that knows it's being hunted. As night fell over Redemption Creek, lanterns blazed in the abandoned Johnson barn at the edge of town. Horses and men gathered there, moving with purpose rather than haste. The Crimson Riders had established their base, and the townspeople locked their doors as darkness descended, an unfamiliar fear settling over the community. In his small room behind the jailhouse, Blackwell cleaned his Colt Peacemaker with practiced precision, each movement automatic after countless repetitions. On his desk lay papers rarely seen by anyone else, old wanted posters, military dispatches about Drake's guerrilla activities after the war, maps of Redemption Creek and the surrounding terrain. The sound of approaching footsteps made him slide. The papers beneath a book before Will entered, anxiety evident in the young deputy's features. Just got word from Fort Wilcox, Will reported. Captain Edwards is sending a detachment, but they won't arrive for at least 2 days. Won't matter, Blackwell replied, chambering around in his revolver, the sound sharp in the quiet room. Drake will make his move before then. How can you be so sure? Blackwell's weathered face revealed nothing, but his pale eyes held absolute certainty. Because that's Drake's way. He never gives potential reinforcements time to arrive. He'll hit us tomorrow, at dawn or dusk when the light works against defenders. Will stared at his mentor with growing unease. You sound like you know him personally. Blackwell was silent for a long moment, his fingers continuing their mechanical task of loading cartridges into his gun. We've never met, he finally said, but I've studied men like Drake my entire life. Men who use violence as a tool, who plan every move like a chess player, anticipating his opponent's response. Marshal, Will said hesitantly, I've never seen you wear a gun before, not in 2 years. Never needed one, Blackwell replied simply. He slid the loaded Peacemaker into a worn holster that looked older than Will himself, then reached into his desk drawer and removed a second identical weapon, checking it with the same methodical care. 2 guns? Will asked, watching as Blackwell loaded the second Colt. Old habit, Blackwell answered, offering no further explanation as he placed the weapons beside his bed. "Get some rest, Will. Tomorrow will test us both." Outside, Redemption Creek had grown still, most citizens retreating indoors as fear spread through the community. But in the darkness, Crimson Riders moved through the shadows, establishing positions, learning the town's rhythms, preparing for violence with practiced efficiency. Through his window, Blackwell could see the distant glow of their campfires at the old barn. His hands trembled as he removed his badge, placing it carefully on his nightstand. The tremor that had become part of his daily life seemed more pronounced tonight, yet there was a strange calm in his eyes, a stillness that came only to men who had faced death so many times that fear had become an old familiar companion rather than an enemy. The night deepened, and somewhere beyond the town limits, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that carried across the desert. Blackwell stood at his window, watching the stars and the distant fires, his weathered face betraying nothing of the thoughts behind his pale eyes. Redemption Creek slept uneasily, unaware that the mild-mannered marshal who had served them quietly for a decade was preparing to reveal a truth he had kept hidden since his arrival, that the gentle lawman they knew was merely a mask worn by a man whose name had once been whispered with fear across the territories. The Crimson Riders thought they'd found an easy target. By tomorrow's sunset, they would learn just how wrong they were. Dawn painted the eastern sky in watercolor hues of amber and crimson as Thomas Blackwell emerged from behind the jailhouse. He'd forsaken his usual attire of simple cotton shirt and worn vest, instead donning a black duster that reached his ankles, clothing no one in Redemption Creek had seen him wear before. Beneath it, twin holsters rode low on his hips, positioned for a cross-draw that suggested years of refinement. The transformation was subtle yet profound. Even his posture seemed different, more fluid and balanced. As though he'd shed a disguise worn for years, Will approached, his young face marked by a sleepless night, and faltered momentarily at the sight of his mentor. "Marshal, you look different," Blackwell finished, adjusting leather gloves that covered his trembling hands. "Get used to it." For the first time, Will noticed the intricate scrollwork on Blackwell's holsters, silver inlay depicting two spectral hands reaching for pistols. The craftsmanship was exceptional, the work of a master gunsmith who had charged dearly for such artistry. "Those aren't standard issue," Will observed, gesturing toward the weapons, never claimed they were. Blackwell scanned Main Street, which remained eerily deserted as sunrise illuminated the town. "I need you to gather everyone at the church. Everyone except Maxwell from the bank and Fletcher from the store." "What's happening?" Will asked, sensing the shift in Blackwell's demeanor. "Drake's men made approaches to both of them last night, offered money for information about the bank's layout and security. They accepted." There was no accusation in Blackwell's tone, merely the statement of facts long anticipated. Will's face flushed with angry betrayal. "How do you know?" "Because that's what Drake always does. Finds the weak links, exploits them." Blackwell's eyes never stopped their methodical survey of the town. "Don't blame them too harshly. Fear makes men do things they'd never consider otherwise." "So what's our plan?" "Our plan is to survive," Blackwell replied. "Get everyone to the church, then find Doc Freeman. Tell him to prepare for casualties." As Will departed on his urgent mission, Blackwell continued his inspection of Redemption Creek's main thoroughfare. With practiced eyes, he noted every potential source of cover, every line of fire, every tactical advantage and vulnerability. He moved with the deliberate efficiency of someone who had assessed killing grounds many times before. Behind the livery stable, he discovered fresh boot prints and cigarette butts, evidence of nighttime surveillance. At the bank, he found scratches on the back door lock where someone had tested its resistance. Behind the general store, ammunition crates had been disturbed, their contents inventoried by unwelcome hands. Clara Sullivan found him examining the church's bell tower, which offered the best vantage point in town. "Thomas," she said, her voice tight with concern, "people are saying Drake himself is leading this gang. Is that true?" "Yes." Blackwell's answer offered no elaboration. "Then why are you sending everyone to the church instead of evacuating the town?" "Because Drake has men watching every trail out of Redemption Creek," he replied, finally turning to face her. "Anyone trying to leave would be ridden down in open country." Clara studied him with growing realization. "You've changed, Thomas. It's like you're someone else entirely today." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Not changed, just remembered." "Remembered what?" Before he could answer, 3 riders appeared at the edge of town. They approached slowly, deliberately, their horses' hooves kicking up small clouds of dust in the morning light. Jacob Thorne rode at their center, flanked by 2 hardened men whose hands rested near their weapons. Blackwell turned to Clara, his voice low and urgent. "Get to the church, now." She hesitated, then hurried away, glancing back once to see Blackwell standing alone in the middle of the street, his black duster moving slightly in the morning breeze, his trembling hands hidden within his gloves. Thorne pulled his horse to a stop 20 paces from where Blackwell stood. "Marshal," he called, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. "Colonel Drake sends his compliments and an invitation to parley." "Generous of him," Blackwell replied, his voice calm and measured. "He's a generous man," Thorne agreed with a cold smile. "Offers fair terms to those smart enough to accept them." "And those terms would be?" "Simple. The bank's payroll, free passage, out of town for his men, and no pursuit. In exchange, Redemption Creek remains standing, and its citizens remain breathing." Thorne's scarred face twisted into what might have been intended as a reassuring expression. "Nobody needs to die today." "Old man," Blackwell's pale eyes revealed nothing as he studied the 3 riders. "Tell Drake I'll consider his offer. I'll bring my answer to him personally in 1 hour." Thorne's expression shifted to surprise. Clearly he'd expected either immediate capitulation or foolish defiance, not this measured response. "Colonel doesn't like to be kept waiting." "Neither do I," Blackwell replied evenly. 1 hour, just him and me, at the creek bend south of town." The riders exchanged glances. Then Thorne nodded reluctantly. 1 hour, come alone and unarmed." With that, they wheeled their horses around and galloped out of town, trailing dust in their wake. Will emerged from a side street, his hand on his gun. "You're not really considering his offer?" "Of course I am," Blackwell said, turning toward the jailhouse, "just not in the way Drake expects." He walked with purpose, his gait smooth and controlled. "How many people at the church?" "Most of the town. Few holdouts refuse to leave their property." "They'll have to take their chances then. We're out of time." Inside the jailhouse, Blackwell retrieved a worn saddlebag from his desk drawer. From it, he removed several items and placed them on the desk. A tarnished silver pocket watch with a cracked face, a folded piece of yellowed paper, and a silver flask engraved with unfamiliar initials. Will watched with growing confusion as Blackwell opened the flask and took a measured sip. "Marshal, what are you doing? Drinking? Now?" "Not drinking," Blackwell corrected, returning the flask. "To the saddlebag. Medicine, for the tremor. You can fix that?" Will asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Temporarily. Comes at a cost." Blackwell didn't elaborate, instead unfolding the yellowed paper, which revealed itself as a wanted poster. The image depicted a younger man with cold eyes and a distinctive scar running from his right temple to his jaw. A face almost unrecognizable as the marshal's, save for the penetrating gaze that time had not altered. Will stared at the poster, his expression transforming from confusion to disbelief as he read aloud, "Thomas Blackwell, known as Ghost Hand, wanted for the murder of 17 men in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona territories. Approach with extreme caution. Considered." The deadliest gunman in the territories. $5,000 reward. Dead or alive. He looked up, shock evident in his features. This can't be you. 17's what they knew about, Blackwell replied quietly, refolding the poster and returning it to the saddlebag. The actual account was higher, but your hands, they shake. You've never even worn a gun in town. The tremor came later. Bullet lodged near my spine. Doctor said it would kill me to remove it, so I learned to live with it instead. Blackwell flexed his fingers, the trembling already less pronounced as the medicine took effect. As for not wearing a gun, that was a choice. Thought I could leave that life behind. Will struggled to reconcile this revelation with the quiet, deliberate lawman he'd known for 2 years. Does Drake know? Is that why he's here? If Drake knew who I really was, he'd never have come within 100 miles of this town, Blackwell answered, checking his weapons one final time. He's here because Redemption Creek looked like easy pickings. An aging marshal with shaky hands, an inexperienced deputy, a fat payroll at a poorly defended bank. So what happens now? Blackwell's pale eyes met Will's, and for the first time the young deputy saw something there that sent a chill through him. The cold, implacable gaze of a predator awakening after long dormancy. Now, Blackwell said, I go meet Drake, alone. That's suicide, Will protested. I counted at least 20 riders in their camp. Then your count was off, Blackwell replied, moving toward the door. They brought 32 men, positioned in 3 groups. 17 at the old barn, 8 watching the trails out of town, 7 more scattered as lookouts. Will stared in astonishment. How could you possibly know that? Because I've spent 10 years studying how Drake operates, and because I walked the town's perimeter at midnight, counting campfires and horse tracks. Blackwell paused at the doorway, his silhouette framed against the brightening day. Station yourself in the church tower, good sight lines from there. If I don't come back, get everyone out through the creek bed. It's the only approach there. Not watching carefully. Before Will could object further, Blackwell strode out into the street, his movements displaying none of the careful deliberation the town had grown accustomed to seeing. Instead, he moved with fluid grace, each step placed. With precision, his entire bearing transformed. Clara intercepted him as he passed the general store. Thomas, everyone's frightened. They're saying Drake will kill us all, no matter what you do. Drake won't kill anyone if he gets what he wants, Blackwell replied, pausing briefly. The payroll? No. Something in his tone made Clara study him more carefully, noting the changed posture, the steady hands, the unfamiliar clothing. It's you, she whispered, realization dawning in her eyes. You're what he wants, or will want, once he knows. Blackwell didn't confirm or deny her insight. Stay with the others. Whatever happens, don't let anyone leave the church until Will gives the all-clear. At the edge of town, Blackwell untied his horse. Not the gentle roan he typically rode on. His rounds, but a tall black stallion that few had seen him ride, kept in a separate corral behind his quarters. The animal seemed to sense the change in its master, standing perfectly still as Blackwell mounted with a grace that belied his years as he rode toward the creek bend where Drake awaited. Blackwell's mind remained perfectly clear, focused on the confrontation to come. The medicine had steadied his hands, but brought with it the clarity and cold precision that had once made him the most feared gunman in 3 territories. The creek bend lay a quarter-mile south of town, where cottonwood trees provided shade over a shallow crossing. As Blackwell approached, he spotted Drake immediately, a tall figure in a grey coat that hinted at his former military rank, seated calmly on a magnificent chestnut horse. 2 men flanked him, including Thorne with his distinctive scarred face. Drake raised a hand in greeting as Blackwell approached, his aristocratic features arranged in a pleasant expression that didn't reach his cold grey eyes. "Marshal Blackwell," he called. I appreciate your willingness to discuss terms like civilized men. Blackwell reined his horse to a stop, maintaining 20 feet between them. You call threatening a town civilization, Drake? I call offering. And terms before bloodshed the mark of a gentleman, Drake replied smoothly. Many in my position would simply take what they want. You're not taking anything from Redemption Creek. Drake's smile remained fixed, but a flash of irritation crossed his features. I admire your loyalty to your little town, Marshal, but let's be practical. I have 30 men. You have what? Yourself and that green deputy? Those aren't odds that favor heroics. Never much cared for odds, Blackwell replied, his voice betraying nothing of his thoughts. I'm offering you the chance to save lives. Drake pressed, leaning forward slightly in his saddle. The payroll in exchange for the town's safety. Simple, clean. There's nothing simple or clean about you or your men, Drake. Blackwell's pale eyes never left the outlaw leader's face. I know what happened in Three Forks, and in Copper Canyon. You took their money, then burned both towns anyway. Drake's pleasant expression hardened. You've done your research, but knowledge won't save you or your town. He straightened in his saddle, his tone becoming clipped and businesslike. Final offer, Marshal. The bank's payroll delivered to me by noon, or we ride in and take it, and I promise you resistance will be met with the utmost severity. Blackwell remained silent for a long moment, studying Drake as one might study an opponent across a chessboard. Finally, he spoke, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. I have a counteroffer, he said quietly. Take your men and ride out now. Leave the territory and don't return. Drake's laugh was genuine, if cold. You're in no position to make demands, old man. I'm not making demands, Blackwell replied. I'm giving you your only chance to ride. Away from this alive. The outlaw leader's amusement vanished, replaced by dangerous stillness. Those are bold words from a man whose hands shake too badly to draw a gun. Sometimes, Blackwell said, appearances can be deceiving. Something in his tone made Drake study him more carefully, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his aristocratic features. Who exactly are you, Marshal? Someone who's given you fair warning, Blackwell replied, turning his horse to head back toward town. You have 1 hour to ride out. After that, what happens is on your head. This is a mistake you won't live to regret, Drake called after him, anger now evident in his voice. Blackwell didn't look back, but his words carried clearly in the morning air. Not my first mistake, probably won't be my last. As he rode back, toward Redemption Creek, Blackwell could feel the eyes of hidden Crimson Riders watching from concealed positions in the surrounding hills. Drake's men were positioned exactly where he'd expected them to be, which meant everything was proceeding according to the plan he'd been formulating since the first scouts had ridden into town. The hour of decision was approaching, and with it, the inevitable violence that Blackwell had avoided for a decade. Ghost Hand, the deadly spectre of his past, was awakening after years of careful suppression. By sunset, the Crimson Riders would discover exactly why that name had once been whispered with fear throughout the territories. And Marcus Drake, for all his military training and outlaw cunning, would learn the fatal lesson that others before him had learned too late. The most dangerous predator is not always the most obvious one. Blackwell returned to Redemption Creek to find a town transformed by fear. Windows had been boarded, doors barricaded. The usual sounds of commerce and conversation had been replaced by an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional creak of wood and the distant call of scavenging birds. At the church, Will awaited him, rifle in hand. What happened? Drake's. Given us until noon, Blackwell replied, dismounting with fluid ease. The medicine had fully taken effect now. His hands were perfectly steady, his movements precise and economical. Less than an hour. And then They'll come for the payroll. Anyone who gets in their way dies. Blackwell secured his horse to the hitching post, checking the cinch on his saddle. Get back to the church tower. When shooting starts, don't expose yourself unnecessarily. Will hesitated, clearly torn between duty and something else. Marshal, the townsfolk are talking, asking questions about you. Someone remembered a story about a gunfighter called Ghost Hand. People talk when they're afraid, Blackwell said dismissively. Doesn't make stories true. Except this one is, isn't it? Will pressed, lowering his voice. I saw that wanted poster, and you're different today, moving different. Even your voice has changed. Blackwell's pale eyes locked onto the younger man's face. Does it matter who I was? Right now, all that matters is keeping these people alive. It matters if you've been lying to all of us. To me, not lying, Blackwell corrected. Just not telling everything. There's a difference. He glanced toward the sun, measuring its position with the practiced eye of a man who had used its arc to time countless confrontations. We don't have time for this. We'll get to your position. The young deputy's jaw tightened, but he nodded and turned toward the church, his back stiff with unresolved questions. Blackwell watched him go, knowing that the fragile trust between them had been damaged. If they survived this day, there would be time for explanations. If not, none of it would matter anyway. Dr. Freeman emerged from his clinic, medical bag in hand. Got everything prepared as you asked, Thomas, though I hope to God we don't. Need it. We'll need it, Blackwell replied grimly. Drake doesn't leave survivors to tell tales. The doctor studied his friend's face, noting the transformation that had occurred. 10 years I've known you, and I feel like I'm just meeting you today. You're meeting the man I tried to leave behind, Blackwell said quietly. The man I thought was dead until yesterday. Ghost Hand, Freeman said, testing the name. I heard stories about him when I was younger. Deadliest gun in the territories. They said he could draw and fire before most men could blink. Stories grow in the telling, Blackwell deflected, though something in his eyes confirmed the doctor's words. They also said he disappeared after a shootout in Tucson, that he took 3 bullets but still managed to kill all 5 men who ambushed him. Freeman's gaze dropped to Blackwell's torso, where old scars lay hidden beneath his clothing. That true. 4 men, Blackwell corrected softly. The 5th lived long enough to put a bullet in my back, the one that causes the tremor. Freeman nodded slowly, pieces of a decade-old puzzle finally fitting together in his mind. And now, Drake's. Coming to finish a job he doesn't even know is his. Not if I finish mine first. The doctor placed a hand on Blackwell's shoulder. Just remember, whatever happens today, these people have known you for 10 years, not whatever ghost you used to be. Blackwell nodded once, then moved toward the center of town, positioning himself where he would have clear sightlines in all directions. The noon hour approached with the inexorable certainty of death itself, the sun climbing higher in a sky that had turned a hard, merciless blue. From his vantage point in the church tower, Will could see dust rising in the distance, riders approaching, from multiple directions, moving with practiced coordination. He counted 5, then 10, then 15 riders emerging from different points around the town. They formed a loose circle, closing in with the precision of men who had done this many times before. They're coming, he called down to Blackwell. At least 20 of them, approaching from all sides. Stay low, Blackwell responded, not bothering to look up. Don't fire until they do. The first Crimson Riders entered Redemption Creek from the east, moving at a walk, weapons ready but not yet drawn. Jacob Thorne led them, his scarred face set in grim determination. From the west came another group, these led by a massive man with a beard like a copper waterfall cascading over his chest. The north and south entrances to town were similarly filled with mounted men, all wearing the red bandanas that gave their gang its name. In the center of the street, Blackwell stood alone, a solitary figure in black, against the dusty thoroughfare. Marcus Drake appeared last, riding down the center of Main Street with the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. He reined his chestnut stallion to a halt 30 paces from where Blackwell waited, a thin smile playing across his aristocratic features. "I see you've chosen resistance," Drake called, his voice carrying easily in the tense silence. "Foolish, but not unexpected. Not resistance," Blackwell replied evenly. "Justice." Drake's smile widened. "Justice is a luxury afforded to the powerful, Marshal. Out here, there is only survival." He gestured expansively at his surrounding men. "And you, sir, will not survive this day." "We'll see." The outlaw leader's amusement faded, replaced by cold calculation. "I respect your courage, misguided though it may be, so I'll offer one final courtesy. Surrender the payroll now, and I'll kill only you, sparing your deputy and the townsfolk." "Generous," Blackwell commented, his tone making it clear what he thought of the offer. "I am when circumstances warrant it," Drake agreed. "Your answer?" "Same as before. Take your men and leave." Drake sighed theatrically as though disappointed. In the child who had failed to learn an important lesson. "Very well, I did try civilization." He raised his hand, a signal to his men, who immediately fanned out into predetermined positions. In the church tower, Will tracked their movements, his rifle trained on Thorn, recognizing him as Drake's most trusted lieutenant. The young deputy's finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed as he remembered Blackwell's instruction not to fire first. The hardest lesson for any lawman to learn was sometimes patience in the face of danger. "Last chance, Marshal," Drake called, his hand now resting on his holstered pistol. "Where is the payroll?" "Safe," Blackwell replied. His own hands hung loosely at his sides, nowhere near his holstered weapons. To the watching outlaws, he appeared either supremely confident or suicidally unprepared. Drake's patience finally snapped. "Take him," he ordered, and 2 crimson riders spurred their horses forward, closing the distance to Blackwell with weapons drawn. What happened next would be retold in saloons and around campfires for years to come, growing with each telling, until it achieved the status of frontier legend. Blackwell's hands moved with such speed that several witnesses later claimed they never saw him draw. One moment his arms hung at his sides, the next both Colts roared in perfect unison, the sound like thunder in the confined space of the street. Both charging riders were thrown from their saddles, dead before they hit the ground. Perfect shots, placed with surgical precision. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Even Drake seemed frozen in shock, his hand still on his unfired weapon. "I warned you," Blackwell said, his voice carrying in the stunned silence. Somehow, impossibly, the Colts were already back in their holsters, returned so quickly that many hadn't seen the movement. Drake recovered first, his face contorting with fury. "Kill him!" he shouted, drawing his own weapon. The street erupted in gunfire. Crimson riders fired from all directions, bullets chewing splinters from the wooden sidewalk around Blackwell, kicking up dust at his feet. But none found their mark, because the marshal was no longer where he had been standing. He moved with preternatural speed, rolling beneath the overhang of the general store as both hands filled with revolver again. 4 more shots, 4 more of Drake's men fell from their saddles. No wasted motion, no hurried panic, just the mechanical precision of a man who had turned violence into an art form. From the church tower, Will finally opened fire, his rifle cracking as he targeted riders attempting to flank Blackwell's position. His first shot caught the copper-bearded giant in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Drake shouted commands, trying to organize his men, but confusion had set in. They had expected an easy victory against an aging lawman, not this deadly whirlwind that seemed to anticipate their every move. Blackwell emerged from cover long enough to empty his revolvers again, each shot finding its mark with devastating accuracy. 8 men down in less than 30 seconds, and still the marshal hadn't taken a hit. "Surround the church," Drake commanded, recognizing the threat from the tower. "Burn it if you have to." 5 riders broke away, charging toward the white clapboard building where terrified townspeople huddled inside. Blackwell saw their movement, calculated trajectories and angles in the split second before he acted. Both Colts empty, he drew a hidden derringer from his boot and fired twice. The lead rider pitched forward, his body tumbling beneath the hooves of the horses behind him, creating chaos in their charge. Will's rifle cracked again, and another rider fell. The remaining 3 veered away from the church, seeking cover behind. The livery stable. Blackwell took the moment's respite to reload both Colts with practiced efficiency, his fingers moving with the precision of a master pianist. 6 cartridges in each cylinder, completed in seconds. "He's reloading!" Thorne shouted, breaking cover from behind a water trough. "Take him now!" 3 outlaws rushed Blackwell's position, firing as they came. A bullet grazed his arm, drawing blood, but he seemed not to notice. The Colts rose again, and 3 more men joined their companions in the dust of Redemption Creek. Drake, recognizing the disaster unfolding around him, changed tactics. "The bank!" he shouted. "Get the payroll! Mason! Jenkins! With me!" 2 riders flanked their leader as he spurred toward the bank at the far end of the street. Blackwell pivoted to track them, but 4 more Crimson Riders opened fire, forcing him back into cover. "Will!" he shouted toward the church tower. "Drake's heading for the bank!" The young deputy's rifle barked in response, but Drake and his men had already reached their destination, dismounting and crashing through the bank's front door with violent purpose. Inside, they found Howard Maxwell cowering behind his desk. "Where's the payroll?" Drake demanded, pressing his pistol against the banker's forehead. In the safe," Maxwell stammered, pointing toward the heavy iron door at the rear of the building. "Open it." Outside, the gunfight had transformed from coordinated attack to desperate survival for the remaining Crimson Riders. Blackwell moved like a shadow through the battlefield his precise shooting had created, appearing where least expected, each appearance marked by the thunder of his Colts and the fall of another outlaw. Thorne, recognizing the losing position, gathered 4 surviving gang members. "Pull back," he ordered. "Regroup at the livery." As they retreated, Blackwell let them go, his focus now on the bank where Drake had disappeared. He approached the building cautiously, aware that the outlaw leader would have established defensive positions. His instincts proved correct when a shot rang out from the bank's window, the bullet splintering the corner post beside his head. Blackwell ducked, calculating his options with the cold precision that had once made him legend. Inside the bank, Maxwell worked the combination on the safe with trembling fingers, hyper-aware of Drake's pistol pressed against his neck. "Hurry!" Drake hissed, his composure cracking as he heard the diminishing gunfire outside, evidence that his carefully assembled gang was being systematically destroyed. The safe door swung open, revealing stacked bundles of currency and several heavy canvas bags of coin. Drake's eyes gleamed at the sight of the substantial payroll, even as his mind calculated chances of escape that grew slimmer by the moment. "Load it up," he ordered his remaining men. "Everything." To Maxwell, he added, "You're coming with us. Insurance." Outside, Blackwell had worked his way to the side of the bank, using the adjacent buildings for cover. From the church tower, Will provided supporting fire, keeping the remaining Crimson Riders pinned down at the livery stable. "Will," Blackwell called, "can you see inside the bank?" "Negative," came the distant reply. "Curtains drawn." Blackwell nodded to himself. Decision made. With movements too fast for the human eye to track clearly, he burst through the bank's side door, both Colts already tracking separate targets as he entered. 2 shots rang out in rapid succession. One of Drake's men crumpled to the floor, a bullet hole centered perfectly between his eyes. The second outlaw managed to fire once, his bullet tearing a furrow across Blackwell's shoulder before the marshal's return shot caught him in the throat. Drake reacted with the speed born of a Life lived in violence, grabbing Maxwell and using the banker as a human shield. His pistol pressed against the terrified man's temple as he backed toward the rear door, dragging his hostage with him. "That's far enough, Marshal," Drake snarled, his aristocratic facade replaced by desperate calculation. "Or I decorate this. Fine establishment with the banker's brains." Blackwell halted, both Colts still raised. For a tense moment, the only sound was the labored breathing of Maxwell, who looked on the verge of fainting. "Let him go, Drake," Blackwell said quietly. "It's over. Your men are dead or scattered." "Nothing's over until I say it is," Drake retorted, edging closer to the door. "I'm leaving with this money and this man. If I make it out of town, he lives. If not..." He let the threat hang unfinished. "You won't make it 10 feet," Blackwell stated, his tone making it a fact rather than a threat. Something in the Marshal's certainty gave Drake pause. For the first time, he truly studied the man before him. The steady hands that should have been trembling, the fluid grace that belied his apparent age, the deadly precision with which he held both weapons. Recognition dawned slowly in Drake's eyes, followed by disbelief. "No," he whispered. "You can't be. Ghost Hand died years ago in Tucson." "Ghost Hand disappeared," Blackwell corrected. "Died is a different matter altogether." Drake's composure cracked further. "If you're really him, then you know I can pull this trigger before you can shoot." "Maybe," Blackwell acknowledged, "but your hostage doesn't change the odds. I shot through a hostage once in El Paso to kill a man who thought exactly like you do now." Maxwell whimpered at these words, his eyes rolling wildly between the two deadly men who held his life in the balance. "You're bluffing," Drake said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Am I?" Blackwell's pale eyes never wavered, revealing nothing of the thoughts behind them. "There's only one way to find out." Time seemed to stretch between them, each second expanding to contain unspoken calculations of distance, reaction time, and deadly intent. Maxwell's terrified breathing marked the passage of these eternal moments as the two lethal opponents measured each other. Drake broke first. With a sudden motion, he shoved Maxwell forward toward Blackwell, simultaneously diving toward the rear door. His gambit gave him the split-second advantage he needed, or would have, against any ordinary opponent. But Thomas Blackwell was far from ordinary. Even as Maxwell stumbled forward, Blackwell sidestepped with liquid grace, both Colts tracking Drake's movement. Two shots rang out in such rapid succession that they sounded like a single report. Drake had nearly reached the door when the bullets found him. The first struck his gun arm, shattering bone and sending his weapon spinning from nerveless fingers. The second caught him in the back of his right knee, destroying the joint and dropping him to the floor, with a howl of pain and rage. Blackwell approached the fallen outlaw leader with measured steps, keeping both Colts trained on his writhing form. "Told you wouldn't make it 10 feet, he said quietly. Outside, the final exchange of gunfire marked the end of resistance from the remaining Crimson Riders. Will's voice carried from the street. "Marshal, we got the rest of them. Thorns." "Down! 2 others surrendered! Secure them!" Blackwell called back, his eyes never leaving Drake's hate-filled face. "Bank's clear." Drake glared up at him, blood soaking his fine grey coat. "If you're really Ghost Hand, why not just kill me? It's what you're famous for." "Because Thomas Blackwell doesn't kill unarmed men," the Marshal replied, holstering one Colt while keeping the other trained on Drake. "Even ones who deserve it. The great Ghost Hand," Drake spat, his aristocratic features twisted with pain and fury, reduced to hiding in a backwater town, playing at being a real lawman. "Not playing," Blackwell corrected him, using a length. A rope from his pocket to bind Drake's uninjured arm, being for 10 years now. As he secured the outlaw leader, ensuring he could do no further harm, Blackwell felt the familiar pins and needles sensation beginning in his fingertips. The medicine was wearing off. Soon the tremor would return, perhaps worse than before, due to the strain he had placed on his damaged nervous system. But that was a problem for later. For now, Redemption Creek was safe. The Crimson Riders defeated, and a decade of peaceful anonymity had come to an irrevocable end. Ghost Hand had returned, if only for a day. And by sunset, the legend would already be growing, spreading across the territory with each retelling. How a single aging lawman had faced down 30 of the West's most dangerous outlaws, and won. Dusk painted Redemption Creek in shadowed hues, of amber and crimson as townsfolk emerged cautiously from the church. They moved through their transformed main street with the stunned disbelief of survivors, witnessing the aftermath of an unimaginable storm. 17 bodies lay where they had fallen, Crimson Riders whose final moments had been marked by the unerring accuracy of Blackwell's revolvers. Will supervised as the town's carpenter and blacksmith, pressed into service as impromptu undertakers, began the grim task of removing the dead. The young deputy's face was streaked with gunpowder residue, his eyes haunted by the day's violence, yet he carried himself with newfound gravity. At the jailhouse, Blackwell secured the surviving outlaws. Marcus Drake, his wounded leg crudely bandaged, and 3 others who had surrendered when their nerve broke. The tremor had returned to his hands with punishing intensity, as though extracting payment for the deadly precision they had briefly reclaimed. He'd removed his gloves, no longer concerned with hiding the condition that had helped mask his true identity for a decade. The army patrol from Fort Wilcox should arrive by tomorrow, he told Will, who stood watching from the doorway. They'll take Drake and his men to territorial prison. Will nodded, his expression unreadable. If they make it that far. They'll make it, Blackwell said, his tone making it clear this wasn't open for debate. What happened today was justice, not vengeance. Tell that to Mrs. Parker. Will's voice carried an edge Blackwell had never heard before. Her husband was shot trying to help Doc Freeman move his medical supplies, left 3 children behind. Blackwell absorbed this news with a slight tightening around his eyes, the only outward sign of the guilt that lanced through him. I didn't know. 4 townspeople dead, 7 wounded, Will continued. Could have been worse, I suppose, but that's small comfort to their families. Blackwell locked Drake's cell, ignoring the outlaw leader's venomous glare. Every death weighs on me, Will. Always has. Even the men you killed today? Especially them. Blackwell moved to his desk, where he began filling out official reports with painstaking care, his trembling hand making the task arduous. Taking. A life is never something to celebrate, no matter how deserved. Will watched him struggle with the paperwork for a moment before speaking again. The town's talking. About you. About Ghost Hand. Let them talk. They deserve the truth, Marshal. After what they just lived through, they've earned that much. Blackwell set down his pen, looking up at his deputy with eyes that suddenly seemed decades older than his 65 years. And what truth would that be? That their marshal has been living a lie for 10 years? That the quiet lawman they trusted was actually a killer with more blood on his hands than Drake himself? You're not like Drake, Will said, with a certainty. That surprised them both, aren't I? Blackwell's gaze drifted to the window, where shadows lengthened across the blood-stained street. We both lived by the gun. Only difference is which side of the law we claim to serve. Before Will could respond, the jailhouse door opened to admit Clara Sullivan. She carried a tray with coffee and food, though her eyes revealed she had a purpose beyond mere kindness. Brought you both something to eat, she said, setting the tray on Blackwell's desk. Figured you wouldn't take time for yourselves with everything happening. Thank you, Clara, Blackwell said quietly, though he made no move toward the food. She studied him openly now, noting the pronounced tremor in his hands, the exhaustion etched in the lines of his face, and something else, a profound weariness that seemed bone deep. People are asking about you, Thomas, she said after a moment, asking if what they're saying is true. And what are they saying? His tone remained neutral, giving nothing away. That our soft-spoken marshal with the shaky hands just killed 17 men without missing a shot, that he moved faster than seems humanly possible, that he's actually the infamous ghost hand who was thought dead years ago. Clara's eyes never left his face. They're saying our marshal has been someone else entirely all these years. Blackwell met her gaze steadily. Not someone else. Just not all of who I was. This simple admission hung in the air between them, confirmation enough of the whispered, rumors already racing through town. Clara nodded once, accepting this truth with the same directness she applied to all aspects of life. Doc Freeman wants to see you when you can spare a moment, she said. Says your shoulder needs proper tending. It can wait. No, Clara countered firmly. It can't. Town needs you whole, Thomas, now more than ever. After she left, Will regarded his mentor with newfound understanding. She's known, hasn't she, all along? She suspected, Blackwell corrected. Never confirmed it until today. How many others? Doc Freeman guessed parts of it. Treated bullet. Wounds that match the stories about Tucson. Blackwell shrugged his uninjured shoulder. Most people see what they expect to see. A quiet marshal with shaky hands doesn't align with stories of the fastest gun in the territories, so they never made the connection. Drake's bitter laugh carried from his cell. The great ghost hand, hiding in plain sight, playing shepherd to the sheep, while real wolves roamed free. Blackwell ignored him, focusing instead on Will. Can you finish these reports? My hand's getting worse. Will nodded, taking the pen. As he began writing, a new commotion arose from the street. Raised voices, the sound of approaching horses, a general disturbance that pulled both lawmen to the window. 3 riders had entered town from the east, moving with the cautious deliberation of men entering potentially hostile territory. Their clothing and bearing marked them as gunmen, though none wore a badge or obvious gang colors. More trouble? Will asked, hand moving to his holster. Blackwell studied the newcomers, recognition dawning slowly. Not the kind you're thinking, he moved to the jailhouse door, stepped out onto the boardwalk where the riders could clearly see him. The leader, a lean man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face, spotted him immediately and raised a hand in greeting that wasn't quite friendly. Heard there was excitement in these parts, the rider called. Didn't expect to find you at the center of it. Ghost. Blackwell's expression remained carefully neutral. Ezra Hardin, been a long time. 10 years, give or take. Hardin dismounted, flanked by his companions, a younger man with cold eyes and a Mexican with an impressive mustache and matching revolvers. Word travels fast when Ghost Hand comes back from the dead. By now, a small crowd had gathered, townsfolk drawn by this new development. They watched with undisguised curiosity as the 2 men faced each other across the short distance. You're not wearing a badge, Blackwell observed. This isn't official business. Hardin's thin smile revealed nothing. Used to be a U.S. Marshal. Retired now, just like you were supposed to be. Then why are you here? Heard Marcus Drake got himself captured. Thought I'd verify it personally. Hardin's eyes flickered to the jailhouse behind Blackwell. Army offering any reward for him these days? $5,000 last I heard, Blackwell replied. But he's my prisoner until the Army patrol arrives, not for bounty hunters to claim. Something dangerous glinted in Hardin's eyes. Funny thing about that patrol. Ran into some travelers on the road, said the soldiers had been diverted. Indian trouble south of here, might not arrive for days. Will had emerged from the jailhouse, positioning himself slightly behind Blackwell, hand near his weapon. The tension in the air was palpable as townsfolk, sensing potential danger, began to move away, seeking shelter. Drake stays here, Blackwell said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had served him for a decade in Redemption Creek. As do his men. Hardin spread his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. No quarrel with that. Just thought you might. Appreciate professional assistance in guarding such valuable prisoners. Appreciate the offer, Blackwell replied, but we can manage. The standoff continued for several heartbeats, neither man willing to back down. Finally, Hardin nodded slightly. Saloon still open in this town? Been a long ride. End of the street, Blackwell confirmed, but no trouble, Ezra. I know how you operate. Just 3 thirsty travelers looking for refreshment, Hardin said with a wolfish grin. Nothing more. He signaled to his companions, and they led their horses toward the hitching posts near the saloon. As they moved away, Will stepped closer, to Blackwell. Who is he? Bounty hunter. Used to carry a federal badge until they dismissed him for excessive force. Blackwell's eyes never left Hardin's retreating form. He's not here for Drake. Then what does he want? Me, Blackwell said, simply, or rather the legend of Ghost Hand. Ezra always thought he was faster, never had the courage to test the theory when I was in my prime. Will's expression darkened. And now that you're older, with the tremor, now he thinks the odds have shifted. In his favor, Blackwell turned back toward the jailhouse. Double the guard on Drake tonight. Hardin won't try for him directly, but he might create a distraction to draw us out. As darkness settled over Redemption Creek, an uneasy calm descended. Lanterns glowed in windows along the main street, illuminating townsfolk working to restore order to their shattered community. The saloon buzzed with activity as people gathered to share experiences of the day's violence, each account growing more elaborate with each retelling. Hardin and his companions kept to themselves in a corner, watching the room with predatory attention, their presence casting a pall over the usual evening conviviality. In the jailhouse, Drake observed the increased security with calculating eyes. Expecting more trouble, Marshal, or should I call you Ghost Hand now? Blackwell ignored the taunt, continuing his methodical check of the building's defenses. His shoulder throbbed where the bullet had grazed him, and the tremor in his hands had worsened to the point where loading his revolvers had become a struggle. They're not here for you, he told Drake, whose arrogance had given way to a seething resentment, so don't get your hopes up for a rescue. Then why the extra precautions? Because men like Hardin never travel with just one purpose in mind. Blackwell secured the back door, then moved to the front window, where he could observe the saloon across the street without being easily seen. Opportunity has a way of presenting itself to those looking for it. Will entered, carrying a pot of fresh coffee. Doc Freeman's on his way. Says he won't take no for an answer about tending that shoulder. Blackwell nodded, accepting the inevitable. Any movement from our visitors? Just drinking, talking quietly among themselves. Will set down the coffee pot, hesitating before speaking again. Marshal, there's something you should know. Folks in town are holding a meeting at the church. About you. This drew Blackwell's full attention. What kind of meeting? The kind where they decide if they still want Ghost Hand as their marshal. Will's discomfort was evident. After today, some are scared. Not of Crimson Riders, but of you. The news landed like a physical blow, though Blackwell's expression revealed nothing. Can't blame them. Man who can kill 17 people in less than 10 minutes isn't someone most folks want living next door. It's not right, Will protested. You saved this town, and reminded them that violence is never far away, even in a place like Redemption Creek. Blackwell moved to his desk, where twin Colts lay partially disassembled for cleaning. When is this meeting? Now. Mayor Parker called it after the bodies were cleared. Blackwell nodded slowly. Keep watch here. I need to speak with Doc Freeman when he arrives. After Will had taken up position, Blackwell retreated to the small room behind the office that served as his living quarters. There, he carefully removed his blood-stained duster, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. Beneath, his shirt was torn and darkened with dried blood from where Drake's man had shot him. He eased himself onto his narrow bed, suddenly feeling every one of his 65 years. The day's exertions had extracted a brutal toll on a body already compromised by old injuries. The tremor in his hands had progressed up his arms, making even simple tasks difficult. A soft knock preceded Dr. Freeman's entrance. The physician took one look at Blackwell and shook his head in disapproval. "Should have come to me hours ago." "Been busy." Freeman set down his medical bag, already rolling up his sleeves. "Shirt off. Let's see the damage." As Blackwell complied, Freeman noted the map of old scars across his torso. White lines from knife wounds, puckered circles from bullets, a particularly vicious mark along his left side that looked like it had nearly killed him. "Tucson?" the doctor asked, gesturing to a cluster of scars on Blackwell's right shoulder and chest. "Tucson," Blackwell confirmed. "3 rounds, close range. 4th caught me in the back as I was leaving." Freeman cleaned the fresh wound with methodical care, his touch gentle despite his gruff manner. "This medicine you took for the tremor. What was it?" "Something a Chinese doctor in San Francisco gave me years ago. Said it would steady the nerves, but at a cost." Blackwell's mouth twisted in a humorless smile. "Didn't mention how much worse things would get afterward." "It's affecting your heart," Freeman observed, noting the irregular pulse at Blackwell's wrist. "Among other things." "How much did you take?" "Double dose." Needed to be sure. The doctor's expression grew grave. "Thomas, that was foolish. This tremor isn't just a nuisance. It's your body's response to severe nerve damage. Suppressing it doesn't fix the underlying problem. It compounds it." "Had no choice," Blackwell replied simply. "Drake would have killed everyone." Freeman worked in silence for a moment, applying salve and bandages to the shoulder wound. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "I've served as doctor in 3 territories, treated all manner of men, from saints to the vilest sinners. Know what I've learned? What's that? A man's nature isn't defined by his skills, but by the purpose to which he puts them." Freeman secured the bandage with practiced efficiency. Ghost Hand may have been a killer, but Thomas Blackwell saved lives today. That distinction matters. Blackwell absorbed these words, finding unexpected comfort in them. "Town might not agree with you. They're meeting now to decide if I should stay." "Fear makes people forget their blessings," Freeman replied. "Give them a time to remember who you've been these past 10 years. A sudden commotion from the front office brought both men to their feet. Will's voice carried clearly through the thin door. "That's far enough, Hardin. Marshall's not receiving visitors." Blackwell reached for his guns before remembering they lay disassembled on his desk. Instead, he grabbed a shotgun propped in the corner, ignoring the pain that lanced through his shoulder. Freeman moved to block him. "You're in no condition for another fight." "Don't have much choice," Blackwell replied, moving past him toward the door. In the office, Will stood with his revolver drawn, facing Hardin and his 2 companions who had entered uninvited. The bounty hunter's hands were conspicuously empty, though his posture radiated deadly intent. "Just a friendly visit," Hardin was saying, his predatory smile never reaching his eyes. "No cause for alarm." "Office is closed," Will replied, holding his ground despite being outnumbered. "Come back tomorrow." Blackwell emerged from the back room, shotgun held ready despite his trembling hands. "Problem here, Deputy?" Hardin's gaze fixed on the visible tremor with poorly concealed satisfaction. "No problem. Just wanted to convey my professional admiration for today's work. 17 men in less than 10 minutes. Impressive even by Ghost Hand standards." "Admiration noted," Blackwell replied evenly. "Anything else?" The bounty hunter's smile widened fractionally. "Just curious if the rumors are true. They say you can't even load a revolver anymore, let alone draw with your famous speed." "Don't believe everything you hear, Ezra. I prefer to see for myself." Hardin's hand drifted casually toward his holster. What do you say, Ghost? One last demonstration for old time's sake. Will's pistol centered on Hardin's chest. That sounds like a challenge, mister. We don't allow that kind of trouble in Redemption Creek. Hardin's companions had spread out slightly, flanking their leader, hands hovering near weapons. The tension in the room crackled like heat lightning before a storm. No challenge, Hardin said smoothly. Just professional curiosity. After all, a man's reputation often outlives his abilities. Blackwell's pale eyes never left Hardin's face. Walk away, Ezra. Whatever you came for, it's not worth dying over. Is it dying if it's a fair fight? Hardin asked, his tone deceptively light. Your hands shake like leaves in a windstorm. We both know you're not what you were. I'm exactly what I need to be, Blackwell replied. Marshal of Redemption Creek. Nothing more. Their standoff was interrupted by the jailhouse door opening. To admit Mayor Parker, Clara Sullivan, and several other townsfolk, they halted abruptly, taking in the tableau of drawn weapons and deadly intent, with expressions ranging from shock to resignation. What's happening here? Parker demanded, his authority somewhat undercut by his obvious nervousness. Just a friendly conversation, Hardin replied, stepping back with exaggerated courtesy. No cause for concern. Blackwell lowered the shotgun slightly, though his attention remained fixed on the bounty hunter. Mayor Parker. Didn't expect to. See you here. The mayor cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. We've just come from the town meeting. There's been a vote regarding your position. A heavy silence filled the room as all eyes turned to the mayor. Even Drake, watching from his cell, leaned forward with interest. And? Blackwell prompted, his expression carefully neutral. Parker squared his shoulders. The town of Redemption. Greek formally requests that you continue as our marshal, Thomas Blackwell. Unanimous decision. The simple statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Blackwell's surprise was evident, if brief, before his features settled back into their usual reserve. That's unexpected, he admitted. Clara stepped forward. Not to those who know you, Thomas. Ghost Hand may have saved us today, but Marshal Blackwell has protected us for 10 years. That counts for more than any legend. Hardin's calculating eyes moved between the townsfolk and Blackwell, reassessing the situation. Touching. The sheep. Defending their shepherd. These sheep just survived an attack by the Crimson Riders, Clara retorted, her voice hard, and they don't take kindly to strangers threatening their marshal. The bounty hunter's smile turned cold. No threats, just establishing old acquaintances. He tipped his hat with mocking politeness. Another time, perhaps, Ghost. As Hardin and his men departed, the tension in the room diminished perceptibly. Blackwell set down the shotgun, concealing the effort it took to keep his trembling hands steady enough for even that simple task. Thank you, he said to Parker and the others, for your confidence. The mayor nodded stiffly. This town owes you its survival, Marshal. Whatever you were before you came here, it doesn't change what you've been to Redemption Creek. As the townsfolk filed out, Clara remained behind. She approached Blackwell, concern evident in her expression. Hardin won't leave it at that. Men like him can't walk away from a challenge to their pride. I know, Blackwell agreed quietly, but that's tomorrow's problem. For tonight, Redemption Creek is safe. Through the window, they could see Hardin and his companions returning to the saloon, their postures telegraphing frustrated purpose. Whatever the bounty hunter had planned, it had merely been delayed, not abandoned, yet as Blackwell watched them go, he felt an unfamiliar sensation spreading through his chest, not the fear or grim resignation that had been his companions for so many years, but something warmer, more sustaining. Redemption Creek had seen him at his most lethal, had witnessed the deadly skill he had spent a decade trying to forget, had learned the blood-soaked truth of his past, and had chosen to keep him anyway. Ghost. Hand might still cast a long shadow, but it was Thomas Blackwell the town wanted. And for tonight, at least, that was enough. The first pale light of dawn found Blackwell on the jailhouse porch, his weathered features set in contemplation as he watched Redemption Creek stir to life. The town bore the scars of yesterday's violence, bullet-riddled. Facades, blood-stained dirt, hastily repaired windows. Yet there was a resilience in how shopkeepers opened their doors and townsfolk nodded respectfully as they passed. They had glimpsed the darkest aspects of their marshal's past and chosen to embrace rather than reject him. Inside the cells, Drake and his remaining men slept fitfully. The outlaw leader's wounded leg had festered overnight, the crude bandaging insufficient to prevent infection. He would require proper medical attention before transport to territorial prison, assuming the army patrol arrived as promised. The tremor in Blackwell's hands had worsened dramatically, punishment for the unnatural steadiness he had forced upon them during yesterday's conflict. He could barely hold a coffee cup now, let alone a revolver. Dr. Freeman's grim assessment echoed in his mind. The Chinese medicine had accelerated the deterioration of his damaged nerves, potentially causing permanent harm. Will emerge from inside, looking haggard after his night watch. Hardin and his men spent the night at the saloon, he reported, drinking but not heavily, planning something. Blackwell nodded, unsurprised. They'll make their move today, likely at noon. Classic, Will agreed with a humorless smile. Why? Do they always choose noon? Lighting? Blackwell replied matter-of-factly. Sun directly overhead eliminates shadow advantages, makes it fair, or so they believe. Nothing fair about challenging a man with your condition, Will observed, nodding toward Blackwell's trembling hands. Precisely why Hardin's chosen now. He's wanted this confrontation for years, but lacked the courage when we were equally matched. Blackwell's pale eyes scanned the awakening street. He's not just after reputation. There's still bounty money on Ghost Hand in 2 territories where the amnesty wasn't recognized. Clara approached from her restaurant carrying a tray with coffee and fresh biscuits. Unlike previous mornings, she set it down on the railing and then handing the cup directly to Blackwell, a small kindness acknowledging his worsened condition without drawing attention to it. Hardin's men were asking questions last night, she said without preamble, about your routine, whether you still practice shooting, if anyone's ever seen you draw since you came here. And what did folks tell them? Nothing useful, Clara replied, with quiet pride. Redemption Creek protects its own. Blackwell nodded his thanks, both for the information and the coffee he now struggled to lift. Will, I need you to take this letter to Doc Freeman, he said, carefully extracting an envelope from his pocket. It contains official instructions. If things don't go as hoped, the young deputy's face hardened. You're not facing Hardin, not in your condition. If I don't, he'll create a situation that forces my hand, possibly endangering townspeople in the process. Blackwell's tone made it clear this wasn't open for debate. Sometimes the only way to prevent violence is to control when and how it occurs. There has to be another way, Clara insisted, distress evident in her voice. If you can think of one. That doesn't end with Hardin forcing a confrontation on his terms. I'm listening. Their discussion halted as a messenger boy ran up, breathless with important news. Riders coming, Army patrol from Fort Wilcox, about 5 miles out. Relief flickered briefly across Blackwell's weathered features. If he could transfer Drake and his men to military custody before Hardin made his move, at least the prisoners would be secure regardless of what followed. Will, prepare the prisoners for transport, he ordered. Clara, spread word through town to stay clear of the main street until the soldiers have come and gone. As they dispersed to their tasks, Blackwell remained on the porch, scanning the buildings along Main Street. If Hardin intended to interfere with the prisoner transfer, the saloon's upper balcony offered the best vantage point, and indeed, a subtle movement behind its curtained window confirmed his suspicions. Dr. Freeman arrived, medical bag in hand. Came to check your shoulder before those soldiers arrive, he explained, though his concerned gaze fixed on Blackwell's violently trembling hands. "And to talk some sense into you about Hardin." "Save your breath, Sam," Blackwell replied with unexpected gentleness. "Some confrontations can't be avoided, only prepared for." The doctor's expression grew grim as he examined both the shoulder wound and Blackwell's deteriorating condition. "The medicine you took, it's damaged your nerves. Beyond what I can treat. This tremor may never improve now. I suspected as much," Blackwell acknowledged. "Cost was higher than anticipated, but the town still stands." "And what about the next threat?" Freeman demanded. "You sacrificed your future ability to protect this community for yesterday's battle." "Sometimes one day's victory is all we get," Blackwell replied, his gaze drifting toward the saloon where Hardin waited. "The rest is borrowed time." Their conversation ended as dust rose on the horizon. The approaching army patrol, 12 riders strong, moving with military precision. Simultaneously, Hardin and his companions emerged from the saloon, positioning themselves strategically. Along the boardwalk, their casual postures belied by the tension evident in their stance. Will led the shackled prisoners outside, Drake hobbling painfully between his 2 surviving men. The outlaw leader's face was grey with fever, yet his eyes burned with malicious satisfaction as he observed Blackwell's trembling hands. "Looks like Ghost Hand's ghost can't even hold a gun anymore," he taunted. "How the mighty fall." Blackwell ignored him, focus entirely on Hardin's subtle movements as the bounty hunter adjusted his position to intercept the approaching soldiers. The stage was set for Redemption Creek's final reckoning. The legendary Ghost Hand, his deadly skills crippled by the very action that had saved the town, faced a confrontation that could not be avoided. The choice he had made yesterday, sacrificing his future to preserve the present, now demanded its final payment. As the army patrol entered town, hooves striking rhythmic patterns in the dusty street, Blackwell stepped forward to meet them, leaving the sheltering shadows of the jailhouse porch. Whatever came next, he would face it in the full light of day. As Thomas Blackwell, Marshal of Redemption Creek, the legend might die today, but the man, the protector this town had chosen, would stand his ground one final time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.